Dan, a ladies' man, resided in a tiny hamlet. He possessed immense wealth, his affluence renowned far and wide. Yet, more than his fortune, Dan cherished women. He had a soft spot for them, and every female knew it. Whenever Dan spotted a woman who caught his eye, he bestowed her with cash, presents, and anything she desired. Due to his immense riches, women flocked to him readily. They grinned, they pursued, and Dan embraced them. Dan wed a stunning woman called Adaku. Adaku adored Dan, but she differed from the other females. Adaku was resilient. She was obstinate. In the entire village, no one dared to provoke Adaku. Her gaze was like flames when enraged, and her words cut like a knife. But Dan was unfazed. He loved his gorgeous spouse. They had offspring together, and Adaku managed the household. Although Dan was fond of other women, Adaku remained steadfast, observing and waiting. Everyone in the village was aware that Dan's affection was fiery. Adaku was not someone to be trifled with, so Dan's existence was filled with wealth and females. Little did he anticipate the impending turmoil. Adaku loved Dan deeply, but her love was intense. She disliked how Dan's gaze drifted to other women. It ignited her heart with fury. Whenever Adaku saw Dan conversing with another woman, her expression would contort with wrath. She didn't mind who it was. She would confront them, shout at them, and make them flee. Despite having children with Dan, Adaku's heart remained uneasy. She loved him, but his fondness for women made her feel as if the earth beneath her was quaking. Dan's eyes were perpetually seeking the next woman, which enraged Adaku. One day, Dan returned home with news that flipped Adaku's world. He had married another spouse. Her name was A.E., and she was breathtaking. A.E. had silky skin, a serene smile, and eyes that seemed to glow like the moon. Chaos erupted in Dan's household. However, to Adaku, A.E. was like a barb. From that instant, chaos erupted in Dan's household. Adaku's heart brimmed with envy, and A.E. became her mark. The home that was once tranquil began to quiver with quarrels and irritation. The tempest that resulted in Dan forfeiting his virility was merely starting. A.E. was mild with a gentle tone and a tranquil manner of moving. She never sought conflict, but Adaku was indifferent. From the day A.E. entered their abode, Adaku's fury surged like an inferno. She couldn't endure the sight of A.E., and she made sure O.T.E. felt her wrath every day. She couldn't stand the sight of O.T.E. "Go and sweep the house," Adaku would command, pointing with sharp eyes. O.T.E. would quietly obey, sweeping every corner while Adaku's children sat and laughed at her. "Fetch water," Adaku's voice would ring out again and again. With no other choice, O.T.E. would pick up the water pot and walk to the stream, her feet dragging with exhaustion. While she worked, Adaku's children played, laughing at how much their stepmother had to do. O.T.E. couldn't take it anymore. She went to Dan hoping he would help her, but Dan didn't care. His mind was always on the next woman he could marry. He barely listened to O.T.E.'s complaints. "I'll talk to her," Dan would say, but his words were empty. He never did anything, and so O.T.E. had to endure every day. Adaku made her life harder and harder, and there was no escape. She worked, she suffered, and there was no one to save her. Dan's eyes never rested, even with Adaku and O.T.E. in his home. His love for women grew stronger. One day, while visiting the town, Dan met another woman. Her name was Neka, and she was different from the village women. She was young with smooth skin, bright eyes, and a smile that could stop anyone in their tracks. Dan couldn't resist. He married her without thinking twice. But Nika wasn't like the other wives. She didn't marry Dan out of love. She only saw his riches, and in her heart, she thought, "This old man won't last long. When he dies, I'll take everything and leave this village forever." When Nika moved into the house, the peace that was already broken shattered into pieces. Adaku, who once ruled the house with her stubbornness, felt threatened. OTE, who already suffered in silence, now had to deal with Nika's boldness. Neka was not like OTE, who quietly did as Adaku commanded. No, Neka was bold, and she refused to be pushed around. She didn't care about Adaku or OTE. She wasn't afraid of Adaku's fiery temper or her bullying. She refused to do any chores and made sure everyone knew that she was in charge. Even Adaku's children had to listen to her. "Go fetch water for me," Nixa would say, and the children would obey. Children were compelled to obey. If even Adaku's harsh commands couldn't halt Neka from acting as she wished, Dan, as typical, remained indifferent. Blinded by Neka's charm, he granted her every desire. Adaku and OTE's protests went unheeded, and with Neka's entrance, the household turned into a cauldron of fury, envy, and strife. The tempest that started with OTE now raged uncontrollably. When Adaku or OTE attempted to complain, Dan dismissed them. He was too engrossed in Neka's presence to heed others. Dan, Adaku, and OTE found themselves in a predicament. "Can't you observe how she handles us?" Adaku would cry, but Dan paid no mind. OTE, long enduring Adaku's harshness, realized a crucial fact. The sole means to manage Nika was to ally with Adaku. Though Adaku had always been her adversary, they now shared a common aim: to remove Nika. Thus, Adaku and OTE, once foes, united. They conspired and plotted, aware that if they didn't act promptly, Nika would continue to dominate the household. Their strategy was straightforward. If they couldn't overcome Nika individually, they would together. The two women became partners in their struggle against the one who had upended their lives. Adaku and OTE understood Dan well. His eyes constantly sought the young and attractive. This insight sparked an idea. If they could present a woman more alluring than Nika, Dan's focus would shift. He would overlook Nika, and she would forfeit her status as the favored wife. One evening, "We require someone irresistible," Adaku murmured to OTE one evening. OTE concurred, seeing this as their sole solution. After days of contemplation, OTE recalled a woman she had noticed in the village. Her name was Tashi, and she embodied Dan's preferences. Tall, with skin as flawless and radiant as polished, clay, and legs that seemed endless. Her charming smile and kind eyes captivated all who saw her. "She's ideal," OTE remarked with a cunning smile. Adaku's eyes sparkled. They recognized that if Dan encountered Tashi, his heart would race, and he would quickly make her his wife. Their plan was that they would introduce Tashi to Dan, and just like that, NAIA would be pushed. Aside, the power would shift once again. Again together, they approached Tashi with their plan. They offered her gifts and promises, telling her that Dan would spoil her with riches if she became his wife. Tashi, eager for wealth, agreed. The trap was laid without hesitation, and so the trap was laid. Tashi began spending time near the popular palm wine cellar, knowing Dan would soon notice her. Adaku and OTE waited, watching closely, certain that their plan would work and that Nika's reign in the household would soon come to an end, just as Adaku and OTE had planned. Dan's eyes fell on Tashi one evening, as she sat by the palm wine cell stall. Her tall figure, glowing skin, and sweet smile caught his attention immediately. Dan's heart skipped a bit without wasting time. He approached her, and within days he made up his mind. Tashi would be his next wife. Dan married Tashi, and soon she was brought into the house as the fourth wife. Adaku and AE watched with satisfaction, their plan unfolding. Just as they had hoped, they knew Dan's heart would now be distracted from Nika, and the power she once had would slip away. She was brought into the house, but Nia, when she heard the news, was furious. Her face burned with anger, and she couldn't believe that Dan had married yet another woman. She rushed to him, her voice trembling as she begged. Dan, please, you don't need another wife. I'm enough for you. Dan looked at her calmly and said, N-N-A, that's how I married. You too, Adaku and OTE were here before. You came, you'll get used to it. Just like they did, Nika felt like a stone had been dropped into her chest. She couldn't believe how easily Dan dismissed her feelings. He didn't care, the same way he had married her while Yadaku and Aoti were already in the house. Now Tashi had joined them too, and Yoe had no choice but to accept it. But her anger boiled inside her. Meanwhile, Adaku and the balance of power has shifted. Aoti were celebrating in silently, knowing that the balance of power had shifted once again. Tashi was in the house, and now it was Nika's turn to feel the sting of being pushed aside. Nika's heart filled with frustration as each day passed. She watched as Adaku and Tashi grew closer, whispering and laughing together, leaving her out. She felt like an outsider in her own home. Whenever they sat together in the evenings, sharing stories and jokes, Nia would sit alone, anger swelling inside. She couldn't take it anymore. Her mother's words made sense, decided to visit her mother, hoping for some comfort or advice. Her mother listened quietly as Nika poured out her frustration, telling her how Dan was now showering all his attention and gifts on Tashi mother. I can't stand it. He hardly looks at me anymore, Neka cried, but her mother was calm. She struck Neka's hand and said, Patience, my daughter, remember why you married Dan in the first place. He's old, soon enough he'll be gone, and all his wealth will be yours. Nika nodded, trying to calm herself. Her mother's words made sense. She had married Dan for his riches, not for love. All she had to do was wait, but waiting wasn't easy. Every day Dan gave more attention to Tashi's gift of gold earrings, necklaces, new clothes, and Neka's frustration only grew deeper. The sight of Tashi glowing, all she had to do was wait with Dan's love, made Nika's blood boil. She had been patient for too long, but she knew deep down that her time would come. For now she would wait, but her anger bubbled under the surface, ready to explode at any moment. One bright morning, it was Tashi's turn to cook for the entire household. The sun had barely risen when Tashi started preparing the meal. As the hours passed, the aroma of Tashi's turn to cook spices and herbs filled the air, wafting out of the compound and reaching the neighbors. People passing by sniffed the air, wondering if there was a celebration happening. The smell was so rich and delicious that even the birds seemed to stop and enjoy it. Tashi had outdone herself. She prepared a soup so flavorful that by the time she finished, the whole house was boozing with excitement. The wives, children, and even the servants sat eagerly waiting to taste the meal. When it was time to serve, Tashi brought out bowls of steaming hot soup with fresh soft swallow, and everyone gathered around to eat as they dug in. Their praises filled the air. Tashi, this is the best soup I've ever tasted, Adaku exclaimed, licking her fingers. Yes, what's your secret? OTE added, her eyes wide with surprise. Even the children, who were usually picky eaters, ate until their bellies were full. Everyone was happy, chatting and laughing as they ate. The joy of the meal filled the compound like a festival. But as everyone enjoyed, Neka felt uneasy. Neka felt uneasy. She had noticed something odd. Dan, who was usually out chasing women or sitting around, hadn't been seen all morning. It was unlike him to be so quiet, especially on a day when the house was filled with such delicious food, while the others continued eating and praising Tashi's cooking. Nika's mind was racing. Where is Dan? She thought. Normally Dan would have been the first to eat, but he hadn't touched the food, and no one seemed to notice. Her eyes scanned the room, and the uneasy feeling in her stomach grew stronger. Something wasn't right. Neka pushed her bowl aside and quietly stood up, her heart pounding. With worry, she needed to find out where Dan was, but a strange fear kept her steps slow. Why hadn't anyone else noticed? She wondered, and why did everyone seem so calm with her H in her throat? Neka decided it was time to investigate something about this feast. Felt very, very wrong as the day wore on. Whereas Dan's friends arrived at the house, wondering where he was. They had planned too. I meet him for a big party, and Dan, who never missed the gathering, was unusually late. The friends called out from the gate, but there was no sign of him. "Where's Dan?" one of them asked when the wives came out to greet them. Tashi, calm as ever, smiled and said, "He's gone out early this morning. He won't be back for a while." Dan's friends were. Dan won't be back puzzled. Dan would never leave without telling them, especially not on the day of a party. Still, they trusted Tashi's words and were about to leave when Niho had been quietly watching stepped forward. "No, something isn't right." Nika Said, her voice tense. "He hasn't been seen. All morning we need to check Tashi's room." The other wives and Dan's friends exchanged confused glances. Tashi looked, unfazed, her face still. As calm as ever. Why would Dan be in my room?" she asked sweetly, but Nisa didn't back down. Her heart was pounding, and the strange feeling she had all morning was now too strong to ignore. "I don't know," Nisa replied, but we need to look reluctantly. They all followed Nika to Tashi's room. The air felt thick with tension as they opened the door inside. The room was quiet too. Tashi's room. Quiet. Nika's stomach turned as her eyes swept across the space. Then suddenly she gasped. There, lying on the floor, was down his. Hands and legs were tied tightly with ropes, and his mouth was stuffed with cloth. Blood stained his clothes, and the sight made everyone freeze in horror. But the most shocking part was what was missing. Dan's manhood had been cut off. A scream tore through the room as SN backed away, her hand covering her mouth. Adaku and OTE stood in stone silence, their faces pale. Dan's friends rushed forward, untying him quickly. But it was too late. Dan's body was limp, his eyes barely open. The once proud and powerful man was now broken and bleeding. Tasha stood in the doorway, her calm smile gone. She didn't say a word as the horror of the scene unfolded in front of her. The terrible discovery shook the house to its core. The man who had once ruled over his wives, chasing women and living in luxury, now lay powerless, his life hanging by a thread. The house, once full of laughter and joy from the feast, had turned into a place of fear and shock. And now everyone's eyes turned toward Tashi, knowing that she held the key to this nightmare. The news of what had happened spread quickly through the village. It wasn't long before a crowd gathered outside Dan's house as Tashi was held down, her arms tied, and her face no longer calm. The air was thick with whispers, and everyone waited for her to speak. They wanted to know why she had done something so terrible as the icon of Dan's manhood. Silence stretched. Tashi finally lifted her head, her voice cold but steady. "Yes, I did it. I caught of Dan's manhood." She began. The crowd gasped, but she continued without flinching. "He couldn't take it anymore," Tashi said. "Here, yes," blazing with anger. "Dan couldn't stop one woman after another, even after marrying me. He couldn't rest. Just yesterday, I saw him with another woman holding her close. She was beautiful, young. And I thought, here we go again, and another one he's planning to bring into this house." The crowd listened in, shock hanging on to every word. I followed them, watching. Tashi continued, her voice growing more intense. He was laughing, with her touching her face, and I knew then that he would marry her. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not again. I wanted it to end for good. If I cut off his manhood, he couldn't marry any more women, no more chasing after anyone. But then, Tashi paused, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know the woman he was with was his sister." A murmur spread through the crowd. "Dan's sister, not another woman." Tashi's eyes darkened as she continued her confession. "I thought she was just another woman who wanted to marry." She explained, her regrets lowly surfacing. "I didn't know. I thought I was saving myself from being pushed aside again, just like his other wives before me. So I planned to stop him once and for all." Then Tashi turned her cold gaze to Adaku and OTE. But I wasn't the only one. Adaku and OTE, they were in on this too. They had their own plan. They wanted to teach Nia a lesson, so they came up with the idea. They said, "We should cut off Dan's manhood. That'll stop him." They said that'll make him stay home, but they didn't have the courage. To do it themselves, I did. The villagers turned. I did their eyes toward Adaku and Ote, who stood frozen. Adaku, always proud and strong, now looked small, and afraid Achin's trembled as she tried to speak, but the guilt was written all over her face. Adaku stammered. It was just talk, whenever thought she would actually do it. But the truth had been laid bare. Tashi's jealousy and misunderstanding had driven her to commit the terrible act. And Adaku and Ot's schemes had only made the situation worse. The villagers could hardly believe what they were, hearing a mix of jealousy. Misunderstanding and betrayal had led to the destruction of Dan's household. Astashi's confession hung in the air. The village just stood frozen in disbelief, but the shock wasn't over yet, and the soup you all ate this morning, Tashi added, her voice cold and chilling. The meat in that soup, it was Dan's manhood. A wave of horror swept through the crowd. The women gasped, and the men stepped back in disgust, their stomachs turning, as they realized what they had consumed. The once joyous feast had turned into a nightmare, beyond imagination. Adaku, who had been silent, beyond imagination until now, saw her chance and tried to slip away quietly, hoping to escape the villagers' wrath. But before she could disappear, someone grabbed her arm. "Where do you think you're going?" "Adaku," a voice called out. The crowd quickly surrounded her, and she was forced to face their angry stares. Adu's face went pale as she realized there was no way out. Trembling, she stammered, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. It was just a moment of anger. I was so frustrated with Dan's endless marriages. I only suggested cutting off his manhood out of desperation." I didn't think Tashi would actually do it. The crowd erupted in murmurs of disbelief. So it was true, someone shouted. "You planned this. This Adaku eyes dead around, desperate to find a way out. It was just talk. We were angry, but I never wanted it to go this far. I just wanted him to stop chasing women. But the villagers weren't, convinced the damage had been done. And Dan's life was lost because of Adaku's careless words and Tashi's cold actions. Ote stood quietly to the side. The damage had been done. Her face filled with regret, but Ayaku was at the center of it all. The whole village was stunned by the evil that had taken place in Dan's house. What started as a plan to get rid of one wife had spiraled into something dark and twisted. The once proud and stubborn Adaku was now caught in the very web she'd helped spin, and the villagers could hardly believe what they had just witnessed. The tale of betrayal. Jealous yawned anger had reached its darkest point, and the weight of their actions fell heavily on Adaku Tashi. And the entire village. Dan's fate was sealed. Despite the villagers' efforts to save him, the injuries were too severe, and he died not long after his once powerful presence in the village was gone, leaving behind a household shattered by betrayal. The village elders grew to decide what to do with the women involved. Tashi, the one who had committed the unthinkable on Adaku, whose jealous schemes had led to this tragedy, were at the center of the storm. Ot, though less involved, had still shattered by betrayal, being part of the plan, and her role couldn't be ignored. After long discussions, the elders reached their decision. Tashi and Adaku were to be banished from the village for their crimes. They could no longer stay among the people they had betrayed, and deceived. Tashi's cold actions and Ataka's poisonous jealousy had no place in the village anymore. Ati, though her involvement wasn't as deep, was also sent away, as her silence and participation had contributed to Dan's downfall. The villagers gathered at the edge of the village to watch as the women were forced to leave their heads hung low, and their once proud faces were now filled with shame and regret. Adaku, aftermath, once feared and respected, was now a shadow of her former self, and Tashi, who'd entered Dan's house with plans of wealth, left with nothing. The village, is still shocked by the events, decided that Dan's children would inherit his property when they were older. They would be cared for by relatives until they were old enough to claim their rightful place. The house that had once been full of laughter jealousy, and turmoil, now stood quiet, its story forever marked by tragedy. As the years passed, the tale of how Adaku and Tashi betrayed Dan spread far beyond the village. People whispered about it around fires, and the story became a warning for others about the dangers of jealousy, greed, and revenge. Though time moved on, the memory of that faithful day lingered in the hearts of the villagers, reminding them of the darkness that could grow from within. Theon's great Dan, brought down by the very women he trusted, became a ghost in the village's history, and the story of Adaku betrayal would never be forgotten. I hope you found the story enjoyable. If you did, be sure to hit the like button, share your thoughts on the lesson from this tale, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories like this. Thank you.